This conference will now be recorded.
So in the previous section, we started with understanding the application traffic flow. And then we discussed basics of HTTP protocol. Once we are through this, we will start with setting up the big IP initially. So there are different phases in which you set up the initial F5 appliance in your network. The first segment being configuring the management port. Then next step comes as activating the appliance. So in activating, you have licensing, you have provisioning, install the certificate, and then configure platform properties. When I say platform properties, it means like device host name, the IP address, SSH, setting up the passwords for the root and admin account. And after this, the third step comes as configuring the network part. Just which involves steps like configuring VLANs, NTP servers, DNS servers, maybe configure HA. So all are different segments in which we set up the initial big IP appliance. Let's try to understand what are the various ways in which you can configure the management port. You can do it using a serial console. So you basically have to have physical access to your appliance, and then you use a null modem or console cable to connect to the appliance. You can use LCD panel. You can use the default management interface. Now, whenever a new appliance is shipped in, there are some default configurations in it. So when I talk about the default IP address, there are two products. One is Big IP, the other is Viprion. Management IP address for Big IP is 192.168.1.245/24, 192.168.1.246/24, and there is default route. No default route is there by default. This is the configuration when a new device comes into picture. And with respect to administrative accounts, there are two types of accounts. One is big IP config utility, and the other is command line. So whenever I say config utility, it is nothing but the GUI access of the appliance. This uses the username as admin, and the default password is also admin. The command line uses the username as root, and the password is default. Now now we start with setting up the IP address, which is configuring our management port IP. You can do it using a script, the management port setup utility, which is using the config command. So you basically um, get access to the appliance through console, and when you get the CLI access, you just type config. This will give you a new prompt for entering the management IP address. Let me just show you how do we do it. So when you log into the appliance for the first time, right? This is how the command line will look like. It will show as no license and standalone appliance. So in here, you just type config and then give enter. So using this config script, you will enter into F5 management port setup utility. You give OK. After this will show you the current configuration. The password is default, root and default. Root is the username and the password is default. The automatic configuration will show you the current configuration. So whether you want to keep the current configuration as it is or no, then you can just navigate through this yes and no option using the arrow keys. No. So you have option to enter the IP address here. You can navigate and delete and enter your IP address. Okay. Okay. If you want to create a route, select this, enter the route. So now this is one of the ways in which we can create our or assign management IP address to the appliance. There is another way also. Now, before moving forward, in this step, let's say you have configured the management IP address. So now you want to verify it. So in order to verify, the command is this command tmsh list sys is the component and management IP address is what you are checking. So after you give enter, it will show you the current IP which has been configured. Or you want to, if you want to see the management route, so instead of management, you just type management route. So at present, nothing is there. Now, same thing, what we have performed here, we can also do it through our command line, which is TMS shell. So in order to go to the TMS shell, TMS shell is, basically the shell prompt of the TMOS operating system. So this vendor has basically built up their own proprietary OS on top of Linux. So their operating system is called as TMOS. So we enter into TMOS by typing TMSH and give enter. The moment you do this, you'll see that the prompt has changed to TMOS. And in here, you give your command to assign the IP address create sys management dash IP, and then you type the IP address. So 10.10.0.251. And after this, you have an option to specify the complete subnet mask or just enter the prefix. So you can do something like 255.255.255.0. This is one way, or you can also do it like this. So after you type this and give enter, you want to verify the management IP address. So again, you would use this same command list sys management dash IP. And in order to configure the default gateway, here the command which you will use is create sys management route default gateway, and then the gateway IP address, say 10.10.0.1. And after this, whenever you perform any changes from the command line, keep it as a best practice that you need to save the configuration. So to save the configuration, we use save sys config and give enter. And similar way, you can also perform and assign IP version 6 management IP address to your appliance. And after this, the other way, these are two different ways which you have seen. The third way would be through the LCD panel. So when you see your F5 appliance, in here you will find a LCD panel, and just next to LCD panel you will have few keys. So using these keys, you navigate to the management section. So you go to system, you go to management, and then select the management IP address. You can enter the management IP address using these keys. And after finally, you click on OK and select those options. So this is one of the ways of configuring the management port. So till now we have seen the different ways in which we can configure the management IP address of the appliance. Next step would be to activate the software. Activating is basically activating the license of the appliance. So let's say this is your F5 appliance and this is your F5 license server. Okay, so what happens is the first step which is involved here is something called as base registration key. This base registration key comes pre-populated on F5 hardwares. This is a set of strings which has 27 characters and it identifies yourself to the F5 license server. So it would be something like, for example, a dash bbb. So like this, 27 strings will be present. So using this, the next step is to create a file called as dossier. This dossier file is nothing but an encrypted file which tells what all softwares you are, what hardware are you using and what all softwares you are entitled to use. So this dossier file we will be, as a third step, we will be sending to F5 license server. And from this F5 license server, after it receives the dossier file, using the dossier file, it generates F5 license. So as a next step, fourth step would be to copy this F5 license file on your F5 appliance. And fifth step will be installing that license on F5. Whenever you are dealing with license activation, there are two methods to it. First is automatic and second is manual. This method can be used when your big IP appliance has internet access so that it can communicate directly with F5 license server. So in this case, big IP automatically generates a dossier file, sends that dossier file to F5 license server, fetches the license from the license server, and then install its install the license on its configuration. In case of manual, the difference is we have to do it manually. So if you don't in your environment, your F5 appliance does not have direct internet access. So this is what you have to follow. This is what you have to depend on. Let me just show you how does the appliance look when you access it the first time from GUI. So always remember to log into the graphical user interface or the config utility. The username is not root. For here, the username is admin and the password is admin. And you give login. This is how a new appliance would look like when you are configuring the appliance for the first time. So you need to go to next, and license will show as not activated. You need to click on activate, and in here you have to put your base registration key, and you can choose the automatic method or the manual method. So only when you have internet connectivity from your appliance, you can choose this method. Otherwise, you have to choose as manual. And after you enter this, you have to click on next. So only when you click on next, at present I don't have a spare key registration key with me. You can request this with F5. So once you have it, you have to enter it here and click on next. So automatically a dossier file will get generated, and that dossier file you have to put it to F5 license server. The URL for it is activate.f5.com. So in here you have to put that contents of the dossier file. Either you can put the contents of the dossier file or maybe upload the file as a notepad. You just browse to the file location and then click on next. After you click on next, a license file will get generated. That license file you have to put it here, the contents, and then again click on next. So at present I will not be able to do it because I don't have this registration key. So the basic funda you guys have understood, right? How we proceed with the first step, configuring the management IP address, and then proceeding with the license.
Yes. Yeah,
And
it's clear.
by default, the location of the license file is slash big IP, sorry, slash config slash big IP dot license. This config folder has all the configuration files with respect to your F5. So now I have performed two steps: configuring management port and licensing the appliance. The next step would be configuring. Third step is provisioning. So when I say provisioning is nothing but the process of allocating CPU, memory, disk space to licensed software modules. So in the previous step, you have basically achieved licensing of the software modules. So now whether even after licensing, whether you want to use that specific module or not, basically depends on this provisioning option. So for you to use a specific module, you have to provision it. You have different levels of provisioning available. So with respect to the management module, you have three options: small, medium, and large. If you find that for some reason, the GUI is reacting slow, especially when you are administrating a large number of configuration objects, you might have to consider increasing the management module provisioning level. So you might start with small, but if you feel that um, with respect to this, I am finding that my GUI is loading quite slow, my appliance management is not responding properly. So you might have to increase the resources that you have provisioned for your management module. Now, with respect to provisioning other modules, you have three different options, or in other way, you can say as four. When you say none, which means that that specific module is currently not provisioned. And then when you say dedicated, let me just turn up the other appliance. One moment. Okay, so we are discussing about the provisioning levels. You can choose this to none. When it is none, which means that you cannot use that specific module. Then you can choose this as dedicated. When it is dedicated, it means that there is only one specific active module. You cannot have any other active modules on your appliance. And you have option for nominal. Nominal basically gives the module its minimum functional resources and then distributes the additional resources only if they are available after all provision modules are enabled. And then you have minimum. So in case of minimum, it allocates the least amount of resources required for that module to be enabled. And then at a later point of time, there are no additional resources which are assigned to that module. When you want maximum number of modules to be enabled, you might try this option. Otherwise, as at a best performance, you can keep this. If you are using only one module, you can keep it as dedicated. If you are using at least one or two or three modules, you can, as a general practice, you can keep this as nominal. And then the next step which comes in will be configuring the certificate or importing a device certificate. Step 4. So you can either choose a self-signed certificate here or a CA signed certificate. So by default, FI will be using a self-signed certificate for itself. That is the reason we see, right, when we try to access the GUI, we get a error page. And after this, basically our activation part is complete. We can choose or specify our platform related properties, and which would be like setting up the time zone. We can configure platform related properties like host name, time zone, again the host IP address, your user passwords for root and admin account. And once you are done with this, you start configuring the network related objects. So let me just show you where do we configure the platform related properties. Appliance is still powering on. So in here you go to system, platform. So after you have done all the configuration of the appliance, you will find all these options in your left side based on what all modules have you provisioned. So this is where you can set up the management related, platform related properties. So you can configure the host name, the IP address, and then what is the password for your root and admin account. You can enable or disable the SSH completely. You can put a restriction to SSH based on the IP address. So only these sources I want to be having as such access to the appliance, that you can configure it here. And after you have completed this, if you want to see, let's say, what all modules have been provisioned on the appliance, so you basically go to system, resource provisioning. So this resource provisioning will show you what modules are current. This license status column will show you what modules are currently licensed, which you can use it. So even though if it is licensed and in the provisioning column it is none, which means that you will not be able to utilize the features of this specific module. So it has to have both license status as licensed and provisioning as provisioned. So you can choose any of these levels. So maybe you can just choose dedicated. So let's say if I select this specific option, and then from the drop down I have these options. By default it will be set as none. So after I do any changes with respect to this provisioning, I click on submit. And always remember that provisioning is a traffic impacting task. So please do not try this in a production environment. Or if you are planning to activate a new module on the appliance, keep it as a best practice to have specific maintenance window to perform this activity. Okay, so now we have understood provisioning and platform specific properties. Let's discuss a bit about configuring the network components. So the network components, we have VLAN, we have self IPs. So VLAN, as you would know, that it is a similar term which we use in Cisco as well. Logically partitioning a physical network. Now, whatever VLANs that we create on F5, corresponding to that, we have a self IP. So self IP is nothing but a IP address and net mask combination that you associate with a VLAN to allow the big IP. This is something which you associate with a VLAN to allow the big IP to access the host in that specific VLAN. So by default, this self IP will represent a address space. That is a range of IP addresses spanning the host in a VLAN rather than a single host. So these self IPs can be of two different types. One is static and the other one is floating. When you have, let's assume you have two appliances which are deployed in HA pair. So the self IPs which are specific to the one appliance will be called as a static self IP, and self IPs which are common. So both IPs will be configured, and the IP will be configured on both the appliances. So that kind of self IP is called as a floating self IP. So among these two devices, whichever has the active role will be taking the responsibility of that floating self IP. Now comes the concept let me just show you where do we actually configure these components. So on your F5 appliance, you go to the network section. On this network section, you can see the various interfaces which are currently available on your appliances. Now, then you go to VLANs, VLAN list. Here you on a new appliance you would not find anything. This is already configured. That's why you can find two VLANs associated. Now let me show you a step for creating a new VLAN. So click on create. You give it a specific name. With this VLAN, what interface are you trying to map to? Select that interface. Choose, let's say, tag or untagged. And after this, you click on finished. So that VLAN will get created. So once you have created the VLAN, then with respect to this VLAN, you would have to create an associated self IP to define the range of IPs. So if you go to network and then self IP. In here, you click on create, then you give the self IP a specific name, then IP address, and what is the network mask. And this self IP will be associated with what VLAN. And on you can consider or think this as of like when at the remote end your traffic is tagged, so at this side also you can choose it is as tagged. And with respect to the self IP, you have option
Hello?
to choose. Yes.
Hello?
Hello. Yes, Ajit.
Yes. Vinit, what I was asking is like in F5 we do define like we have already defined the VLAN IP, so that VLAN IP needs to be matching the IP address that we have tagged backend, like on the
No, no,
below
we
side
don't.
of the, yeah.
No, we don't create VLAN IP. We first
ID
create the
ID.
VLANs.
Yes. So
Yes,
we
yes,
define
yes.
a VLAN ID, right? Something like
Yeah.
40 something.
Yes,
So
yes.
does that need to match if you are using the tagged?
Yes, correct. Both ends it has to match.
Okay, it's only so we are just using that because we have already tagged a villain on the lower side.
Yes,
If
correct.
it's just a normal case like in router, we can just use the untagged. Is it?
Yes, 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 that's correct.
Okay. Okay. Thank you.
And then this self IP, you also have an option to allow with respect to this self IP, what ports are allowed by default. So by default, whenever you are creating a self IP, the port lockdown feature will say as allow none. So you can change this to allow default. When you choose this to allow default, so default ports like SSH, HTTPS, SNMP, these ports will be allowed on this specific IP address. So you will also have a accessibility to this appliance through this self IP. For some reason, let's say if in a client environment you want a redundancy to access the appliance, so if for some reason the management section is completely down, so you can access this appliance through this IP address as well. Okay, and then you choose, by default it will be selected as floating, not non-floating. If you want, if you are trying to configure the same IP address on the peer box as well, you can just click on drop down and choose as floating, and after this you just click on finished. So self IP is nothing but a range of IP addresses that F5 will be trying to communicate with this IP. And with respect to monitoring, you will always see the traffic to your servers going in that VLAN. Let's say you have some 10 servers defined in your external VLAN. So in that VLAN, all the communications or the monitoring traffic which F5 will initiate towards your servers will be initiated with this IP address. So based on what subnet it is, it will take that specific source IP from your F5 appliance. So now I have completely set up my appliance in terms of configuring the basic objects. If there is a need for taking the complete backup of the appliance, so let's say first time you have configured all the network components, you have provisioned everything, and you just plan to take a base configuration backup. So then you go to System, Archives, and in here you click on Create. You give it a specific name, let's say, and always keep a tendency to give the file name as same as the host name so that it will be easy for you to identify it. And then from here you have an option to enable or disable the encryption on this file, because this file is very important in terms of your F5 configuration, whether you want to completely encrypt the contents of this file. You can choose the option as enabled or disabled. By default it is disabled. And you also have option to store the private keys. These private keys are the keys corresponding to the various certificates that you install on your F5. So these are related to various applications, not this device specific certificate. These are the keys corresponding to various application certificates which you have installed on your F5. So whether those are private keys are very crucial. It should not be exposed to hackers. So if you want to ensure maximum security, you can enable encryption and also include these private keys. To have a complete configuration backup, it is better that you choose this option as include. Or if you want to exclude it for some reason, let's say in your environment you have um, a restriction that you should not export the private keys or you should not store the private keys somewhere, so then you have option to exclude it, and then you click on finished. So now my configuration will get saved and the default location of this configuration creation is var local UCS and then the name whatever you have given. You press as OK. So you can see the configuration file here. So by default, the configuration is called as UCS, user configuration set. And this configuration file at a later point, let's say maybe after down the lane 2 months, 3 months, 4 months, you have performed many changes, and for some reason some things are failing in your appliance. You want to go back to a previous configuration. You have this old UCS. You select this UCS and click on restore. So what will happen is this UCS will get installed on your current configuration, and the same UCS that you have created now via the GUI, you can also do it from the command line. Let me just show you. So in the CLI, the username would be root and the password is default. So in here, if I want to save my or create my UCS file, I would go to my tmos shell using the tmsh command, and then I type save sys config, then let's say I give enter. So with this, if you mention the name as well, let's say my UCS, sorry, it should be not config, should be UCS. So now my UCS file has been created. Location is var local UCS, my UCS.UCS. So you also have an option to store this UCS in a different location. So in here, let me just first delete this again. Save this UCS. Instead of just giving the name, I can specify the complete path.
Hello.
Hello, guys, can you hear me?
Yes, yes, Vinit.
Sorry, my network connection got dropped. Okay, so instead of just entering the name, if you plan to save this UCS file to a completely different location, you can give that complete path. So let's say I type var temp, then my UCS. And once this file gets created, as a best practice, it is recommended that you get this file out from the box. So because for some reason, if let's say there is a hardware issue with the appliance, so you have to have a backup of the appliance. So you can log into the appliance using WinSCP, go to that location and just copy the file. So you log in like this 10.10.0.240. I give the management IP address, the username, and go to root var temp. Is it saved now? Okay, var temp. My UCS. Okay, there you go. This is the file. So you just drag and drop to your local desktop. So this is how you save the configuration on the appliance and then move it out from the appliance. So I think for today we'll stop it here. We'll continue with the traffic processing objects on the appliance from tomorrow.
Okay.
Okay,
So
sure.
you guys are able to follow up, right? Any specific doubts that you have till now?
No,
No,
as
it's
such,
clear.
like for today's session, it was more like what we did in like what we usually do for other modules as well, right? So
Yes,
it was
yes.
good.
This is generic. Yeah, it is generic. Okay. Thank you.
Okay.
Thanks
Thank
a
you.
lot. Bye.